Investigative journalist Russ Baker has been digging into the background of the Bush family and says a shadow presidency of oilmen, financiers, and intelligence operatives helped shape both Bush administrations. The book is Family of Secrets, the Bush Dynasty, the powerful forces that put it in the White House and what their influence means for America. And Russ Baker is here. Wow, this is quite a tome.
It's a long book.
Yeah,
and it's
5
got a
years
lot of material.
and 500 interviews.
Thousands of documents, right.
You said you started out looking really at Bush too, George W. Bush, and you ended up focusing more on Poppy. And what led you there in the first place?
To the father,
yeah.
You mean. Well, as I looked at George W., I was struck by this story we'd all been told about a sort of a rift in the family. The son was so different from the father, and pretty clearly on, he established that that had been exaggerated deliberately to make the son more electable, because the father was just not that popular as a politician. He was denied a second term. And in fact, what I found was that the father and son were very, very closely connected. And what they didn't want us to do was to look at the father and find out more about the father's own background. And so about half of Family of Secrets is about George H.W. Bush's secret life.
Yeah, well, I mean, his secret life was the CIA. I mean, so that's understandable that it was secret, right? I mean, Gerald Ford named him head of the CIA in 76, but he had clearly been in the CIA for a long time before that. I mean, isn't it common that stuff would be held
Actually
secret?
Not. I mean, if you look at, let's say, Leon Panetta now, he was a congressman, no connection to the CIA. George H.W. Bush was put in at a time where the CIA was under scrutiny as never before for abuses and illegalities domestically and all over the world. And he was brought in supposedly as a fresh face who was going to help in this process of reforming. And in fact, what I discovered was that he had been a lifelong officer involved in all manner of operations, including domestic operations of great gravity, actually. And this is an interesting issue because, of course, we talk about Vladimir Putin, how the Soviet Union felt it was okay to take someone from that world of darkness and compromise and make them the head of a country. And we did the same thing, we just didn't know it.
You know, you and I go way back. I should point out to the audience we worked at Fox back in the early 90s, so I know how legitimate you are and I know how hard you work. Having said that, I mean, some of this stuff sounds nutty, and I know you're not, but, you know, the associations, the George Bush Sr.'s association with the assassination of John F. Kennedy, with some of the bin Laden family, with Saudi stuff we've sort of known about, but, I mean, what are you suggesting there, that he actually... that there was some, you had his ties to Fidel Castro, that there was some cover-up there. I mean, what are you suggesting? You know,
I thought it was very important to say that I came at this with no agenda at all. I simply wanted to ask the question, how did this family attain so much power? They were president or vice president for 20 of the last 28 years. It's a remarkable thing. Nothing like this has ever happened before in American history. And I wanted to know a little bit more about that. And so I was willing to just ask questions and follow this. And about 2 years into this process, Emily, suddenly I kind of went down this rabbit's hole and I started finding that the father had all of these secrets, and I mean really profound ones. And for example, in a television interview, somebody had asked him the unexpected question, oh, do you remember where you were the day Kennedy was shot, November 22, 1963? And the elder Bush stumbled and he sort of said he could not remember, and I thought that was so strange. And I began,
nobody cannot remember.
Right, and he was 40 years old. He was a Texan. The shooting was in Texas. And he actually, turns out, he was a candidate for U.S. Senate that year traveling around. And so I just thought, well, I'll just answer that question. And this took me 2 years. What I came up with are 4 chapters of new material on the Kennedy assassination. It has completely changed my mind. I thought it was Lee Harvey Oswald and done with, but it turns out that what we know about what goes on in the world and the admissions by our own agencies of what they have done against democratically elected leaders in other countries also applies to this country. And, you know, it makes perfect sense because when you think about it, we have these entrenched interests. We see this with what's happening on Wall Street. We know about it with Dwight D. Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex. All of these power centers have only grown and solidified in the intervening years. They are very powerful players.
Okay, but follow your thought through here. Are you suggesting that Fidel Castro was behind the assassination and that George W. Bush knew
Oh,
about it?
no, not at all. No. There was a deliberate effort to frame both the Cubans and the Russians for the assassination. I'm not the only person, by the way, that has come to this conclusion. There are a number of very, very fine books that have been researched by people for years, and every one of those serious books...
And then Vincent Bugliosi debunked them all.
You know, I've spoken to Vincent about it. I like him, but, Vincent worked from material, primarily things like the Warren Commission material, and we don't have time here to go into all of that.
He says he's gone through every single theory.
He hasn't. In fact, I explained many of the revelations in my book, and he did not know about that.
I'll tell you what I found fascinating was the connection to the oil world and that dummy foundation or company that they set up. Really, he was still in the CIA, and he pulled somebody else away from the CIA who was fairly high operative, put him in charge of this company. But really, it was a spy company. It was under the name of an oil company that was traveling around the world.
Well, they all were. In fact, I studied George W. Bush's companies, many of the companies that have never been reported on before. And for example, one of them that we knew a little bit about before, I went deeper, and this is the one where Harvard University put $40 million as its endowment in, and I discovered that the man who was the chairman of the Harvard Corporation himself had CIA connections, and that they were moving these large amounts of money. I'm sure people at Harvard would be interested to know this. And the money was
Maybe they could get some back. They've lost so much of their endowment.
That's right, and it was being mixed in with money from the dictator Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines, and the Saudis, and the Shah of Iran, and the South African apartheid regime. I mean, this is staggering, because when you think about globalization, it changes completely your understanding of even the notion of nationalism, because the playing field that these people operate on is a completely different one than you and I might.
What kind of response, if any, have you gotten from the Bush family?
Total silence, because they would have to answer questions like, where were you on November 22, 1963? And by the way, in this book, I actually reveal where Mr. Bush was, and I think he's going to have trouble talking about any of this. I also go into things
like...
You say
he made a phone call that day.
Oh, he did a lot more than that. He was in Dallas, and we have declassified documents showing him with several different identities. One is a private citizen calling in to the FBI claiming he knows who shot the president. In a second instance, he's a CIA officer getting a briefing from the FBI. And in his third instance, he's this private man, an oilman, who doesn't remember where he was. These are just facts, documented facts, not disputed, but it would be interesting to know what the answer is. As far as George W. Bush goes, you remember that whole story with Dan Rather and everything about his military service record? Basically, CBS was on the right track.
You think Bush set them up to fail on that?
I think so. And
they gave him those dummy
That's
documents.
right. That's right. And if you look at the facts, and the thing about Family of Secrets and the strength of it, and the reason it's being taken so seriously, is I go to great lengths to just lay all this material out, and I say, let the public read it and decide for themselves what all this means. But clearly, George W. Bush skipped out on 2 years of service while he's sending all of those National Guardsmen to Iraq and Afghanistan, and all these horrible things, as you point out in the other segment, are happening to them. He's never been held accountable for this. This book is about accountability and about all these things are going on. And I have to say, these are things that are going on today, because Barack Obama faces the same challenges with these same power centers.
Russ, pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. Family of Secrets, Russ Baker. All right, that is it for Greater Boston. For more information or to catch a previous segment, log on to greaterboston.org. Tomorrow night, the parents of David Woodman, who died during a Celtics celebration, plus design research in Cambridge and its 50-year retrospective of Marimekko. That's tomorrow at 7. I'm Emily Rooney. Good night.